And behind us is the land that we owned.
This is not how the Houston family expected their lives to turn out.
It was swampy land, but it was home. It was home, and it was land owned by my parents.
This is the kind of history that is usually associated with the Deep South, but it took place in the Pacific Northwest, in Renton.
It's kind of heartbreaking to see it now and realize the dreams that my parents had.
Houston and his two remaining siblings are fighting for reparations from the Renton School District, which bought their parents nearly 10 acres of land under threat of eminent domain in 1968 for $44,000. The district said back then that it needed to build a new school to accommodate an expanding population fueled by Boeing's growth in the area. It purchased 10 additional acres from two families, one white and one black, to build Apollo Middle School. It paid a total of $92,000 for the 20 acres. The new school was never built. Boeing began laying off workers in 1969 and early 1970s and what is known as the Boeing bust. In 1980, the school district sold the 20 acres of land to developers for nearly $187,000, more than double what it had paid. The houses that now occupy the land have contributed millions of tax dollars to the city and the school district over the decades. Houston said his parents' land was supposed to be passed on to him, his siblings, and all their descendants.
They had it set up for us. Generational wealth is talked about a lot these days. How families pass on things to their children, their grandchildren, and that was taken away from us.
Houston and his older brother James spoke to Converge media about their family's history and their struggle for justice. Their grandparents were slaves. Their parents were sharecroppers in 1940s Louisiana. Their father George fled that state because he was accused of disrespecting a white woman, a dangerous accusation in those days, and he was being persecuted, Houston says.
Although he hopped trains most of the way, he made it to Bremerton, Washington. He had heard from others that in the naval shipyard in Bremerton was hiring black men. So that's how he got here.
Their father had a third-grade education and could barely write or read. Their mother had a seventh-grade education. By 1953, when John Houston was born, his parents had saved enough money to buy some land in Renton on what was then 132nd Street, and it is now known as Union Avenue.
My dad, he didn't want to work for anybody because he didn't have no education. He was black. It was the 50s, the early 50s. Bad time for a black man in this country. And he knew if he had some land that he could take care of his family.
It was one of the few areas where black people were allowed to buy land due to redlining.
It was actually a sundown law here. After sundown, black people were harassed if they were caught downtown, it was pretty bad.
The Houstons cleared the land by hand and made it into a working farm.
Mostly we raised pigs, cows, chickens, sold egg, we sold pork. My dad also tore down buildings, had a demolition business, if you will, where we tore down buildings and salvaged the lumber, resold the lumber, bricks, windows.
We always had chicken. We always had food because we lived off that land.
George Houston also used the land to strip the steel, copper, and other metals from old trucks, all to make a living for his family. In 1956, the Houston family home burnt to the ground. One of George Houston's demolition clients gave him a house that he moved to the farm. In the 1960s, Renton was growing, which led the Renton School District to expand. In the mid-1960s, the district started searching for land to build a new middle school. It targeted the Houston farm and home and two adjacent properties across the street from Honeydew Elementary. The Houston brothers say the district offered to buy the land several times during this period, but their parents refused.
They started coming at my mom and dad about our property and saying they needed our property to build a school. And when my mom and dad said, no, that this is how we live and make our living, we live off this land, we need your property. And then they said no.
Documents provided by the school district back up the brothers. Those papers also show that the district was preparing to take the land through eminent domain.
And then here they come back again. We want your property, or we could force you to sell it, And that's where my mom and dad was first told about this eminent domain and stuff. They didn't know what that meant. They didn't know anything. We're 7th grade education, mom, 3rd grade education from my dad from the South.
Racial tensions were also high in the area during that tumultuous era. A suspicious fire burned the Houston second house around 1965. John Houston had been out with a friend at a Seattle Totems hockey game and remembers the incident.
I came home from the hockey game. My friends and their parents and their dad pulled up down our little road there, and just all I saw was steam, and the fire was out, but I saw the flashing lights. It was rain. I'll never forget that sight, just steam coming up and flashing lights, and we looked around, didn't see anybody.
Jerry Evans, one of John's oldest friends, was with him at the game. Evans and his father were about to drop John off when they saw the fire.
And right away we noticed that there was a fire truck, a smaller, not the big fire truck, but a couple of those, and aid cars and things like that, at the door. And we could tell that there was still a fire going on at the Houston residence towards the front porch area.
Evans said his father spoke to one of the volunteer fire department members who was there.
And that's when they said it looked like it was a firebomb or an accelerant that had started the fire towards the front porch area. And obviously my father, who's a very quiet man, you could tell he was emotional and upset. We had the opportunity on the way home to talk about it. He mentioned that things in the world aren't all right for a lot of the minorities right now.
Mike Bronson met John for the first time that night. He says his mother saw a glow in the sky from their house nearby, so they drove there to see what was happening.
We didn't know who it was. We saw it was a black family. We saw the house was fully engulfed. And my mom just pops out of the car, and she's, running into the house, bringing the kids out, getting them in the car. I mean, they were smoking. And it was quite a scene.
The school district continued to pressure the Houstons to sell the land under the threat of eminent domain. They refused all the offers. With racial tensions mounting, matters got worse. Around 1967 or 68, there was an explosion at the Houston home. James Houston was staying at a friend's house that night. His friend's father took James to his parents' home immediately.
And when I got up there, it was the worst sight. It was just terrible. Family, my mom's crying, my dad, he's cussing. There was a hole in the wooden porch. The bottom part of the door, it was gone, and the metal thing across, it was all bent and stuff, and it was just terrible.
In 1968, under the threat of eminent domain, the Houstons gave up and sold the land to the Renton School District. Their father, George, who had a 3rd grade education, signed the document with an X. Within a few years, the parents separated and divorced. George Houston moved to Moses Lake, where he died in 1973. Rachel Houston stayed in Renton so her children could stay in their schools. She worked multiple jobs to stay afloat. She died in 1998.
I'm 69 years old. I have leukemia. I'm legally blind. I still work. I own a small business. And I shouldn't be working. My mom shouldn't have died penniless. My mom literally died penniless.
John, James, and their sister, without much parental guidance, became addicts. The two brothers got clean and have been so for years now.